Welcome to a new episode of Season 1 of the Make Boards Work podcast. Today's guest is Dzulko, the founder and CEO for about 10 years now of Everphone. You have recently reached 100 million in revenues and you support more than 400,000 devices. Congratulations, amazing entrepreneurial journey and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Yes, I think it's amazing too, and it's especially amazing that I am still here. I think when I started Everphone 10 years ago, and I'm like the startup person that really likes the beginning and the energy of the beginning, I don't think I would have thought that I would be here this long, but it feels great and I'm having super fun and I'm very happy how Everphone developed.
Beautiful. So let's really learn from all your experience and so much war stories I'm sure we get to hear. You've raised about 8 rounds to date, and that includes also debt funding more recently. And typically with new investors come new board directors, often simply adding on top. How has your board evolved over time?
Yeah. Great question. Maybe let's start in general what I expect from a board as a founder. And the great thing is I think I have both perspectives. I'm a board member of different boards and startups, and I've already now had a board for 10 years and it has been evolving. So in general, I think the big role of a board is basically 2 things. It's to prevent very big mistakes so that the things founders don't see themselves because they're so in the tunnel that the board has an outside view and tells them, look, there's danger you're not seeing right now. The second thing is to support founders when they need help. Sometimes the founders know that, so they will communicate the help, but I think a great board will actually see when a founder needs help, and not only factual in decision making, but also emotional. Because founding a company is a roller coaster, an emotional roller coaster. And if then in the private life of a founder, maybe one of the pillars of life is a little bit shaky, it can very quickly lead to burnout. So I think to a certain degree, the board members have to be psychologists too. So that's I think is the general role of boards, how I interpret it. And I think there are 2 big mistakes I've seen in boards, and I've made myself, I have to admit. And boards can be either too toxic or too nice. And I think both things are equally dangerous for a board. Too toxic, you demotivate the management team because you might be saying the right things, but the message doesn't arrive because people hate criticism. Everybody hates criticism. And if it's delivered in an emotionally unfair way, people don't accept it. Yeah. Or you can be too nice when your message is lost. So having said that, yes, the board in 8 years has changed massively. In the very beginning, high speed, little control in the company, MVP, fast validating of hypothesis. It's mostly helping to keep the ship on course, basically. So I would say that's in the very beginning, the most important thing, to get the guidance from the board members to not totally run in the wrong direction, but still let them explore enough so they can find the product market fit. And then later, new investors join, and the older and bigger the company gets, in my opinion, the more important it is that they have a view, a nearly conservative view on the company, to prevent the companies to make big mistakes that will end up in the company running out of cash. So I think the most important thing is the board has to make sure that the company doesn't run out of cash. So they have to say, hey, you guys have to think about raising. Your run rate is 8 months. Stuff like that. One would think the company should have that in view, but often the company is so in the tunnel, or the management, that I think the board should do that.
Beautiful. Your definition of the 2 sides is very, very similar to what my shortest definition of board is support and challenge. And I think that's fairly strongly aligned with your view of this avoiding mistakes. And the last point you just made, let's start there, where you would say, you as CEO, you as founder, of course you see when you run out of cash, but the board with more distance, sometimes it's easier to see the big things with more distance, being not in the weeds, correct?
Absolutely correct. And I think, again, that basically the great thing that a board usually only once in a quarter looks at your financials, looks at the information you present, has the great advantage that you see the difference. It's like with seeing children growing. If you see them every day, you don't notice. If you see them
Correct.
once a year,
Yeah.
you see like, wow, you've grown a lot. So I think that that's the great advantage most board members have, that they really see the big picture and can help the management stay in the big picture. In that, though, I think is also the biggest threat again for board members, that because they see only every quarter, they look at numbers or the product or margin and stuff like that, that because of very little information, they jump to conclusions
Yeah.
in details.
Yes.
So they suddenly say something like, why don't you raise prices by 10%? Then all your cash flow problems are solved. Yes, of course, that mathematically makes sense, but they don't know the customers. They don't know the dynamics in the market. They don't know anything so often. And that, for me as management, then is a way of sort of knowing it better. And then I, as a manager, feel like, don't you think we've thought about that? You know, we do this every day. Don't you think we have thought about raising the prices? So I think board members have to be very careful not to or to suppress that urge. If you see something you think is a good idea, to not immediately put that problem solving engine on and throw things to the management, which evidently, I mean, management is spending all day thinking about something like pricing or something like that. Obviously they've thought about it. So I do that too, but I think it's a good idea to suppress the problem-solving engine once in a while.
How do you strike the balance? That's a beautiful angle, the avoiding this problem-solving. And probably the antidote would be to start with questions, especially with open questions, open-ended questions.
Yes, that, for instance, would be a great way, and it goes back to the too toxic or too nice thing. I believe a question is always a great way to engage a conversation because it's on eye level. You see eye to eye when there's a question, and you give management the chance. So if you present the question, do you see any room for increasing prices, or have you tried a pricing strategy? That is a great question a board can do or can deliver. But I think the other way around, to look at the data and then come to the board meeting, and the first thing you say is like, I solved all your problems, just increase prices by 10%. That is like a classical thing that immediately sets the tone of the board meeting. And then I think it's nearly impossible to get back to a level where you get a productive board meeting, because once emotions flare up, it's very
hard to temper.
for everyone in the room to control them.
I love this notion of operating at eye level, right? Because what you said, such a comment as "Have you thought about raising prices?" can very well, most likely, will land in a condescending way, right? Kind of top down, and as you said, might set the meeting up for failure from the very start. Another angle of staying at eye level is using real experiences, right? Coming from experience sharing, and not from telling you what to do, not from giving advice.
Yeah, that is a great point, and I think that is we also touch the composition of the board, because in the very beginning, most boards are made up out of business angels, because these are the first investors, and usually they are operators themselves. So they very much understand where founders are coming from. And in the beginning, I have to say, in the first 2 years when I had business angels on my board, there was never an emotional problem or condescending problem. Later, when financial people enter, it's a very different dynamic, because they don't exactly know this experience. On the other hand, they bring to the table a lot of other experiences, which are super important to founders, without a question. But I really felt a break in how the board worked when we suddenly had PE type of people or banking background people who have not been operators. And I first also, as a founder, had to get used to how to take their advice, because I think they also speak a different language. Because they've been trained in different situations, they've worked with more formal, bigger companies and stuff like that. So that clashed sometimes. I think that they thought I'm not accepting their feedback, and I thought they're very condescending. So, and they obviously, when they talk of experience, their experience is far away from my experience, because they will tell me in other companies, in other boards I sat, 10% price increase really helped. You should do it too. And there is experience in there, and that experience also is valuable to a certain degree. But sometimes it's hard to relate to, because I obviously see it from a builder perspective.
Yeah.
So that, I think, is something boards, as they grow up, or companies as they grow up, it's a very good idea to sit down with all board members and talk about communication. How do we communicate in the board? And that has evolved a lot at Everphone in the past 10 years.
Elaborate a little bit on that. How has that evolved?
So, as mentioned in the very beginning, no problem. Let's call it the honeymoon of a relationship. So the relationship between the management and the board, highly aligned, same language. We understood each other, and it was really a joy. I was looking forward to board meetings because they were a source of input, sharing experiences and stuff like that. And really, basically, they were part of the management.
Is there an element to that? You said, it was business angels, they were builders themselves, operators themselves. So I think one element of such people is they have gone through entrepreneurial ups and downs like you have, like the sleepless nights and all that. Is there an element of that as well? They really get you?
Yes. And I think that's a big advantage in the very beginning. But then exactly in there, I have to be critical with myself. If as a founder I want to grow, obviously at some point I need the experience of people who have run bigger companies and who have this financial angle. And that, I think, was the most difficult process. And again, maybe like in a relationship, if something major changes. In this case, we had the major change from being a small company that was looking for product market fit to a company that wants to become profitable. And that's the major change in mindset, because you suddenly look at different things. You look at unit economics, you look at efficiency, you look at does it really make sense to scale unlimited and stuff like that. And suddenly enthusiasm turns to the need of control.
Yeah.
And there, these people from a banking background, a PE background, and different things, they do have a lot more experience. But it takes a while until I, in my founder mindset, make that switch.
Yes.
And I think a great board member that has a PE background and comes into a young, small, fast-growing company has a great board member helps the founder to switch in that mode. Builds a bridge, not immediately expects professional board meetings like they did when they were invested in a Nasdaq company. So they slowly help and support the founders to close this gap. And that, maybe to an experience share we did back then, because I remember the first board meetings being horrible, or I felt horrible going out of the board meetings. And then at some board meeting, I said like, hey, can we, in the next board meeting, 15 minutes, talk about how we communicate and why every board meeting so far has been at least not satisfying to the board members. And that changed a lot. The classical, how do I feel in a certain situation? And that cleared the room, and then we could have a much better board meeting.
Beautiful. I love that you really took, the courage to speak up and says, look, it does not make me feel good at the moment. How can we turn this around?
Yeah, and it really helped. It was great. And I also there I have to pay a big compliment to the investors back then, or board members back then, because I was afraid, without getting too many stereotypes, but they were evidently a little bit older, more senior. And I was a little bit afraid that they would get the wrong impression. Basically, like, management can't take it, or is too weak, or too touchy-feely, basically. But it was the exact opposite. It was a great session. We took the radical candor framework to discuss how we want to communicate, what is toxic communication, what is effective communication, what is too empathetic communication. And we all walked out of this meeting, I think, with really, it gave a chance to clear the room, and then we could really focus on a good board meetings. So that was something that really helped this transition. And once I understood where they are coming from, I could accept their advice much better.
An amazing example of where you having the courage to be vulnerable led to a great outcome.
Yes, basically, you're right.
Let's get back to this too toxic versus too nice, right? It's a again beautiful, powerful frame. Any episodes where kind of the too nice, where you saw too nice a bit as a risk, as a danger?
Yes. Actually, I would say at the end of the business angel journey, in the beginning it was great because it was more or less they were co-founders, you can nearly say. And the touch points were also much more often than just once a quarter. It was literally monthly at least, if not sometimes weekly in certain phases with certain business angels. But looking back, if I'm honest, once we found product market fit and before we raised enough money to get sort of the PE and banking types on the board, when things were going well, the board meetings were a pure ceremony. It was a pure, you're doing so great and so on. And then I realized there's nobody but the board that tells the CEO sometimes like, hey, come on, you can do better, you can do more, you can here, look there, something, are you seeing this danger? And that didn't happen at the end of the journey because precisely, I think also the business angels at some point, they come to their personal limit where they can help because they're builders too. They don't want to say all the other things. So in those moments when it's really like money is running out or something, you need that one person on the board that says, guys, runway 6 months, even if you start raising now, it will be a close call. Tomorrow you start with fundraising. And that is clear communication, but you can do it in a nice way so that it's not toxic. You can also say it the toxic way. Guys, you're all idiots. You will be out of business in 6 months. Why didn't you start raising? But I think that's a nice way of saying the exact same thing with clarity.
One being clearly more productive than the other one, right?
Exactly. But there, I think maybe we can dissect this example for a second, because I think the too nice way is like, I looked at the run rates, it's 6 months. You might want to start looking into fundraising, but you know what? You have a great growth trajectory, will be no problem. This will work out. I go out as a founder and think everything is fine. Then can be the toxic, you guys are too stupid, you will run out of money, you don't run this company well, too toxic, and I get kind of angry. But in the middle is, I see that you're running out of money, let's come up with a plan to fundraise together. That, for instance, could be a good communication.
Beautiful. Another aspect which caught my attention is your COO, Mehmet, is basically on board since the very early beginnings, where other C functions, Veronica, as CFO, or your COO, are relatively recent. So you really started to professionalize, complement your C-level team. What role does your board play, and has your board played in the whole talent development of how building your business?
A big role. And I think that is also something where the board can really help, because obviously often they come from larger companies, so they have seen what great C-levels look like. And this is not founder mode. Founder mode is doing everything yourself. And at some point it's C-level mode, where you really have to run your department in coordination with the other departments. And there, I think, and I extensively also use the board members to do interviews with these people, so we get a holistic view and a holistic feedback. Of course, in the end, the decision still is mine. If I would like to add this person, so I have to green flag them, but then the feedback of the board members is very, very valuable. So I would always consult them in these questions of hiring new C-levels.
I love exactly this example and this angle. Recently wrote about that, and there's really two schools of thoughts on this one, where one says, well, the CEO hires his or her team, and it's not the board's remit. The board's remit is only the CEO decision. And then there's mature CEOs and boards, I think, that really see it as a collaborative. It's your call, but you can leverage the board because, for example, how many CFOs have you hired? Probably not that many, right? So not that many CFO interviews, whereas possibly a financial type, a PE person might have had 15 CFO hires over her career, which adds something to the equation.
Absolutely. And I think that's when management and board really excel if they cover each other's weaknesses.
Yes.
So that I don't have to get trained to hire a proper CFO, COO, or other C-level, but I tap the resources we have in the board. And that's exactly the help part. So I think board has to prevent danger, big dangers, the icebergs of the Titanic way. And on the other hand, they can help in certain things where they just have more experience. Because, I mean, also for me, 10 years journey, I've built a company before, but never to the extent that it became 100 million. We have a Citibank debt facility over 200 million. These things are completely out of my experience scope.
Yeah.
And that's where I can really use the help of the board, that they help in these steps. And my board does that, thankfully. But yeah, that's incredibly helpful to use the skills on the board.
How have you built trust in your boardroom? Say, if we take an example and possibly a fictitious one, say, okay, on a C-level hire, it's my call. And, maybe the perspective is not extremely or not completely homogeneous. Maybe you are a very favorable view on a candidate and one board member at least is somewhat skeptical and you might decide to go ahead, but now it's a bit a tougher decision, right? There was some doubts raised. And that can tarnish possibly the trust level. How do you constantly build and rebuild the trust in the boardroom?
Yeah, I think trust is actually the most important aspect of any board, and trust and maybe to a certain degree respect. I think these two things build the foundation of a good board, that you trust and respect each other. And then I have to say situations like that never came up that one party walks out disappointed, because what we basically have is we have both, let's call it veto rights. So if we have a candidate and I would like to move forward with a candidate where the board has strong feelings against, they will veto. If they bring a candidate I have strong feelings against, I will veto. Both will respect that decision, because neither do I want a person where the board clearly says no, and later if that person fails, of course the full responsibility is on me, and vice versa. So in the end, I think building that trust is very important, and it gets lost very quickly. And then we come back to this clear the air meeting, which I think is super important. Once there is, let's say, a collision of board and management in a board meeting, which I think happens frequently, I think it's good to later talk about it, what happened, and get the emotions out and clear the room, which we did in one of the first board meetings, to then again come back to this trust and respect level we've been before.
Which is what we in the Army call the after-action review, right?
I don't know. What is that?
Kind of after-action review. Really, something has happened. It needs to improve. We need to prevent something similar happening from going forward. Not pointing fingers, not blaming, but what can we learn from it? How can we get out of this better?
Yep, we actually established now something very similar in every board meeting. So at the end of every board meeting, the board members get 10 minutes the room for themselves. They discuss how they see the current situation, management and stuff like that, and then give us 5 minutes condensed review and feedback also about the board meeting. So that's very helpful.
That's what again in expert terms called executive session, right? Where only the non-executives stay in the room and talk. And then in my case, in my boards, where I chair the board, then I provide the summarized, anonymized essence back to the management team, to the CEO. And as you say, right, it might, when you started doing that, was there some level of discomfort for you?
Yes, to a certain degree, definitely. I'm generally speaking, I would say I'm very open to feedback, and I really like it. But I think it's the situation. 10 minutes, people are talking about you.
Yeah.
then a
Yeah.
different room, and they're talking about
Yeah.
you. And that was always
And your
a little bit
company
of
that
odd
you
feeling.
built like from the ground up for 10 years, right?
Exactly. And yeah, so that was definitely a little bit odd feeling, but then it was later clear that that was very highly useful, because other than that, the board members don't get together and
Yes.
organize a call. They're too
Yeah.
busy. So it really gives them also a chance to align their different views without us a little bit, and give the feedback. So yeah, I'm a big fan now, but yeah, you're totally right. In the very beginning, it felt a little bit uncomfortable.
How I just want to expand a little bit more because again, it's something a practice I really try to instill, and often see resistance and apprehension, and again, very understandably so. But I really see big value in it, right? As you just acknowledged. So how can we help a young founder gain more comfort with that discomfort?
You're absolutely right. And I think that's from my own board experiences. And I, being a builder and a business angel, sit in the board in the very beginning, of the journey. So I'm not the person that is later in a later journey, a good board member, I think. In the very beginning, I think one of the biggest mistakes I see in founders is they're afraid to communicate bad news. So one of the things that really helped me is to force them into a update format in the very
Yeah.
beginning of the board, which I also always expect as a present. So I think board material should be delivered a week before the board starts, to give everyone the chance to ask follow-up questions and really digest the material. And there, I've noticed that especially younger companies are afraid of bad news. So I simply added a section, lowlights, and that's the first one.
Yes.
Let's start with the
Yeah.
lowlights, and let's start with our highlights, and then have the regular update. And I think that forces them, because if that slide is empty, I say, I don't believe it. Don't tell me everything's going well. There must be
Yes.
something. So I force them to put like 3 points at least on the what's not going well slide, and that often. And then when they see, they can always communicate the bad news. And of course, I never then get angry when something goes wrong. Then that builds a lot of trust, and
Yes.
that enables them to share more bad news. Which is important.
Love that, because one line I often share in my boards to founders is, there's nothing worse in a board than surprises, right? We don't want to be surprised. We have a responsibility. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Exactly. And especially not, surprise with good news is okay. The other surprise,
Yeah.
obviously, and that's what I mentioned in the beginning. So I think the most important role of a board member in an early stage company is to have a view on the runway.
Yes.
Just the biggest mistake, in my opinion, is that founders underestimate cost and overestimate the revenue curve. Hence, they will run into problems faster than they think. So if they tell you they have 9 months of runway, probably in reality it's 6 months. And they also underestimate how long it takes until the money's actually in the bank.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
even if you close the round
Yeah.
after 6 months, it takes another 2 months until the money is in your bank, and they don't factor that in. So, and that's pure experience. Been there, I've done
Been
that.
there.
So
Exactly.
that's my
Exactly.
job.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Let's get back to trust. You made the sense. It's lost. It's tarnished very quickly, right? It takes very little to damage trust. If you, I don't know, an episode that comes to mind where you had to repair trust, where you had to reestablish trust because something didn't go as planned.
Yeah. So as mentioned, when we switched from this founder board, or let's say this business angel board, to the financial people board, there in the very beginning, I remember that we had something that went wrong in one of our investments while expanding. So we, let's say, made a mistake one could have avoided, but it was simply, we'd never done this before, and this is just how we operated. Make mistakes and learn is one of our big values. So we, as we did before, where the trust level was very high with the business angels, we put it on a slide like, oh, sorry, we wasted 150K by employing a wrong strategy entering the market. And they got really angry. They were in the meeting and really said, "How can this be? And who's really responsible for that? And why didn't you see that?" And it was completely this absolutely new way of giving us feedback. Shocked everyone in the room, and then what happened is the next time we didn't report on something. Something similar happened again, because that happens all the time. If you move fast, you break things. We didn't report on it.
Yeah.
But then I thought, like, no, this is a problem.
Yeah.
If we don't report on it, and then I asked for the meeting where we shared our feelings and we said, like, look, we were honest and transparent. I want to be honest and transparent in the future, but please, if we're honest and transparent, react in a way that is nice and we can accept this feedback instead of this toxic feedback. So there was really a clash, and now we had to get used to each other and the styles of each other. Then we had this meeting where we cleared the room literally and understood each other much better. And that helped a lot to build trust, because we could also have continued, and I think it would have gotten worse and worse and worse. We would have been hiding information, playing the board, as many people I think do. And the board would have developed this feeling of they're hiding something.
Where they get more curious and more digging, and then it gets a very, very downward spiral, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Big danger.
Fantastic. I love, now we've come full circle with this too toxic to the noise in this clearing exercise and the trigger for the clearing exercise. Another element that I think is very crucial for good boardroom behavior is to make people safe in the boardroom. For example, what you shared, this clearing where you led with vulnerability, right? To have enough safety feeling for you to say, okay, I dare to show myself vulnerable, or to contradict, or to ask maybe an awkward question. What have you seen working in your board experience to create that safety in the boardroom?
First of all, at least one board meeting a year in person. Purely virtual boards for me are a big problem. And we've seen that actually also in Everphone, because at some point, when we especially started to have international investors, we thought post-corona, great idea to always do them.
Yes.
Everybody does everything virtual, and it's amazing for many things. But it has one big downside, I think, and it's especially hard to build trust. Because there was particularly one board member I remember had never seen this person in real life, only virtually. And somehow, due to obviously communication, you don't see the body language so well, and you only talk about business topics.
Exactly.
So
yes,
this lunch before a board meeting in person is the trust builder number one, where you talk about your kids and what you did on the last holidays and stuff like that. So you see the other as a human being and not
just as a competent professional.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So that would be my big advice. We now actually changed all board meetings. Sometimes we still, if it's really not possible to organize, but other than that, we try to do all board meetings in person.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And I think it's really, especially, it's not just a board meeting in person. It's really this adjacent opportunity to get to know each other, not just as professionals, but as you said, as human beings, to talk about children, family, vacation, whatever, books we're reading, because trust is two facets, right? One is the competency side. The other is the personality, the more the integrity part. And that is almost impossible on Zoom because we don't add the time, right? We don't do the chit chat on Zoom.
Exactly. And everyone is in the work mode.
Exactly. Yeah.
Purely, this is now I have to perform. Then usually
efficiency.
Board meetings are transcribed.
Yeah.
So you don't even want to say something maybe a little more human. You try to be super professional. So yeah, that is something I feel is very important. Second thing, I would say also in person, usually people have a little bit more time. On Zoom meetings. They are like, oh, I have to stop, sorry. And you're still in the middle of a discussion. So timekeeping, I think, is much tougher when you do it on Zoom. So yeah, I think that's, which is, by the way, a great other point I've learned about board meetings. My board meetings often derailed because on slide 4, I put a little side sentence and we went to a tangent and the entire board meeting was gone. So we really now have hard timekeeping, and what we do once we enter a discussion like that we basically say, okay, we'll make what we call is a deep dive session. That can then happily be as a call, but then we really deep dive into marketing, into operations, or whatever it is that was discussed, and that has been highly helpful too, because these sessions, then all board members that are interested in that can join, but you don't have the stupid situation that 10 minutes to the end of the board meeting, you still have 5 very important points to cover, and you rush through them.
Yeah.
Because that, I think, everybody hates, and also erodes trust.
Absolutely. And it also probably prevents a bit the zigzagging between jumping between topics, because you say, okay, this seems to be interest to really dive deep. So you park it, put it aside, continue, and then whoever is interested, you schedule a separate session to really go deep and have enough time for that. I love that, because I've seen exactly the same, and I think it can really weigh on the board dynamics. It can erode trust, as you say. It can really drag down the energy, which is also very negative. I love that kind of parking and deep dive separately method.
Absolutely. And by the way, that came in from the outside, so from one of our board members. And I think, again, that shows once a board professionalizes, they come with a lot of experience also with board meetings. So I think it's also great advice to founders who have not been running large companies or have been on a board themselves, to listen to their board members how to run a great board meeting.
Yeah.
That, I think, in itself is something for senior board members, that they say like, hey, I've seen this board meeting, this and this and this works well. This and this and this, I would suggest let's try it and improve on these things. So they are experts in running board meetings, of course, because they have been on boards.
Yes.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
Anything, Jan, that you're passionate about in what makes boards work that we haven't touched upon yet?
I think one of the big problems, of course, and that fully includes me, everyone in a board has a big ego and strong opinions. That is just, otherwise we wouldn't be doing these things.
Exactly.
And we wouldn't be building companies, or we wouldn't even spend our time on boards. So I think the most important thing is to find a way and to understand how the other board members tick, what motivates them and what demotivates them. Because if we're in a heated discussion, it happens too often that we hurt somebody. And obviously we have big egos and we think we can't be hurt, but honestly, everyone gets hurt if discussions and emotions fly high. So I think that's a great thing, especially for the high ego people, to sit down and say like, look, if you say something like this, it totally demotivates me because I find it unfair and hurtful what you're saying. And even admitting that most people can't do, because with the big ego we have, we think I'm perfect and I'm great. So I think that to sit down and say like, look, I think there was this great quote from one VC, if you're the smartest person in a room, you're in the wrong room.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's exactly every single one should say that as a mantra. I'm entering this room and I'm just one of 8 others, or how many board members you have, and we all make mistakes, and we want to communicate in a productive way. And that I would say is the most important thing in a board in the beginning to check, so it doesn't end up toxic or too nice.
Yeah.
To me, it's always where boards sit.
So an appeal to humility at the very start, and being very aware of that.
Yes. But then on the other side, you can also, if you learn about a board member that is maybe a super people pleaser, a appeal to clarity.
Yeah.
That you say like, hey, you said that. I didn't even hear that you say we have to be fundraising now. Next time, please be clear. I need clarity. So the board members have to learn how communication works best with the other board members. And then communicate in a way that the others understand that, not in the way that I want to communicate. So all, I think, have to change a little bit in their communication to the setting and to the board. And a super interesting side fact, I sit on a Danish board. They have a different way. They kind of use a lot of humor to holding up a mirror through humor, which works really well. And I've really appreciated that. But I'm pretty sure I couldn't do that in like the classical German board setting. People would think like,
Yeah.
Come on, stop that. Exactly. We all know. So I also find it's very interesting that you have international differences.
Yeah,
I would love
absolutely.
to sit on a board of a big American company, by
Yeah.
the way. That would be great.
Time will come, Jan, I'm sure. If you,
I just to see it, not
as
because I personally want it.
as a as a concluding question, and it can be real people or more like descriptive, kind of how would your dream board look like if you can build your dream team, like a dream soccer team, whatever, your dream board, how would that look like?
First of all, very diverse backgrounds. I think I would wish somebody that is a founder and operator on my board. I would wish for somebody who has run a company in my current size, but also somebody that is senior, maybe also much older and wiser, and has been through all the journeys before. So really different people, not clones. Sometimes you see everyone is from a VC, and you think like, well, they're all intelligent people, but all have sort of very identical views. So I would like them to be very diverse in terms of experiences, but also personality, and of course all other diversity aspects. Have a decent amount of women on the team and a good mix, basically of also international backgrounds, as mentioned. The Danish board, super interesting. So I think even to have international views on the board is always a very good idea. And then I would love that the board I have double under rights. I always want to do the best for Everphone in my particular case, so that people don't have an agenda. So
Yeah.
my ideal board, they don't have an agenda. And even though everyone has an agenda, it's impossible not to have one. But when they step into that room, the focus goes on how can I improve the business, and not how can I improve or protect my stake or whatever it is. You have what your role is in the board. So that would be a second thing, a mindset of we're building something together and we want to be successful, and the company should be successful, and not I myself want to be successful or present myself in this meeting. That I think is the ideal board. And then again, somewhere between toxic and empathetic, because so clear and nice. If you can be both at the same time, I think then you really nail communication in a board.
Fantastic. And with that, I think, Jan, you summarized some of the very, very salient pieces of wisdom and knowledge that you shared, right? This notion of in between, not too toxic, not too nice, and the bridge to get there is really an adequate form of how we communicate, clear but not offensive. Then the trust and respect as a key foundation of a functional board, the keeping the ego in check with this appeal to humility and clarity. I think these are amazing nuggets. I learned a lot. Thank you so much for being my guest. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure so will the audience. Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and also helped me reflect how I can improve my board, because I think I also have a long journey of improvement with my own board and with my own role in boards. So thank you very much. This was enlightening.